Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Waj, and in this video we'll be doing a direct head-to-head camera comparison between the Sony a7 II and the Canon 7D Mark II, which just recently came out. Now, even though these are different cameras, both in terms of form factor and sensor sizes, I really want to see how the 7D Mark II, which is probably one of the best crop sensor DSLR cameras you can buy in the market, both for videos and photos, does compared to the latest offering of Sony's full-frame lineup of digital cameras, the a7 II. So if you're interested in that, we're going to be specifically taking a look at the video and image quality differences between these two cameras and see which one has the best image quality. Now, the size differences between these two cameras are fairly substantial to some extent. The a7 II is a lot more lighter. It only measures about 599 grams versus about 910 grams with the battery installed in both cameras. Now, in terms of durability, both of them are made out of magnesium alloy in terms of the primarily build materials, and they're really high quality made. Now, the 7D Mark II is really designed to be an outdoorsman camera and a very, very rugged build quality. In fact, it has a reinforced shutter actuation system that's guaranteed for 200,000 cycles versus about 150,000 cycles on the a7 II. Now, in terms of sensors, we are using a different type of sensor on both of these cameras. We have an APS-C size sensor, which is a crop sensor on the 7D Mark II, which is rated for about 20.2 megapixels, and we have a 24.3 full frame sensor on the Sony a7 II, which is really nice. We actually have a larger sensor on the camera that's actually smaller and lighter. But however, one thing you have to consider is that the 7D Mark II is one of the best crop sensor DSLRs in the marketplace, both in terms of photos and videos. It has a lot of different capabilities, and price point wise, it really hits that sweet spot mark of what the a7 II is actually going for. And one of the most outstanding factors of the 7D Mark II is its autofocusing system, which has 65 all cross type autofocusing points, and the autofocusing system itself is one of the most powerful and accurate that Canon has ever put onto a DSLR camera. Furthermore, another thing that makes this comparison a little bit interesting is that we both have hybrid AF systems in both of these two cameras. The a7 II is using 117 phase detection points and combination of 25 contrast detection points, which is going to give you the fastest and most accurate autofocusing system you can have in a mirrorless camera. Now, we actually have dual pixel technology on the 7D Mark II. It's actually technology that is carried over from the 70D, and that's basically going to allow the 7D Mark II to basically have really fast and accurate autofocusing system in live view mode. So much like the system on the a7 II, the Canon is using a combination of phase and contrast detection points to get you the best autofocusing system you can have in live view mode, both for videos and photo capabilities. Now, if you're going to shoot video using the hybrid AF systems, I think both cameras deliver a very nice and human-like autofocusing system that looks very pleasing to the eye and natural and not jarring at all. So I'm really impressed of what both cameras can do in terms of autofocusing. Now, another party trick of the 7D Mark II is the fact that it can do 10 frames per second in full burst mode, which is absolutely insane. There's only a handful of cameras that can even come near that kind of FPS score, and we have a 5 frames per second ability on the a7 II, which is definitely not bad, but nothing compared to what you can do on that 7D. Now, in terms of the viewfinder, we have obviously an optical viewfinder on the 7D, which is very accurate. It has 100% coverage, so great for professionals out there that want to know exactly what their photos are going to look like in the frame lines of that viewfinder. And we have a electronic viewfinder that's 100% coverage. It's an OLED screen, and it has a 2.35 million dots, so extremely sharp electronic viewfinder. Sony is doing an excellent job in developing their EVFs for even professional applications. And even though there's a little bit of input lag, so it might not be as good for sports photographers or nature photographers who absolutely require a pinpoint accuracy in terms of their focusing and preview. You're just not going to beat an optical viewfinder at this stage until the input lag becomes pretty much a zero response time. Now, the rear screens on both these two cameras are fairly good. They're very similar in terms of overall screen size, but we do have a slight higher resolution on the Sony. Plus, the Sony screen is a little bit articulating. It has a little little bit of a tilt option, but although it's not as good as some of these screens that we find that have full articulating capabilities, such as the Canon 70D, which allows you to fully rotate the screen to do some self-portrait photography. Now, with all that specification stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the image quality differences between these two cameras to see which one comes out on top. Now, in terms of the overall clarity and sharpness, I don't think the Sony itself has anything extra to offer. Sure, it has a couple of extra megapixels of resolution, but in terms of sheer sharpness, I'm really impressed at what the 7D can do in terms of rendering out a really fine detail, and I really can't see myself as seeing a huge advantage in terms of the overall sharpness you get from that full frame sensor, which is typically the case, but the sensor is so good on the 7D that you can definitely get some great landscape photography and some really great macro photography if you so desire. Now, in terms of the actual low light performance, shooting JPEGs, I think the 7D Mark II is definitely not as good as what the Sony a7 II can do in terms of low light performance, which is certainly a shame. I wish it had better low light performance, but because of that larger sensor size, you definitely have more photons hitting that sensor, therefore more light available to you, and that's just one of the plain advantages that you get from having that full frame sensor compared to that crop sensor. So I'd probably say that you probably want to use the 7D Mark II around 5,000 and lower to get really usable images. You can get 6400 ISO usable to some extent depending on lighting condition, but the Sony a7 II has no problem in rendering out really clean overall details compared to the 7D at ISO 6400 and beyond. Now let's talk video features. Both of these two cameras are very similar in terms of capabilities. They can both do 60 frames per second and full 1080p as well as 24 frames per second, and they both shoot at fairly high bitrate. Now the bitrate is higher on the 7D Mark II because you can shoot in all eye mode, which will give you a maximum bitrate of about 91 megabits per second versus about 50 megabits per second maximum if you shoot your video in XAVC S mode, allowing you to get that higher overall bitrate. Now in terms of connectivity for video mode, you do have a microphone and a headphone jack input, so you can easily record audio using an external mic and monitor that, no problem. And both cameras have uncompressed HDMI output, which will allow you to send 4.22 8-bit recording to an external recorder, or if you want to live stream or something like that, you do have clean HDMI out, which is definitely nice to see on both cameras. Now let's go ahead and take the time to review some of my video footage that I shot out of these two cameras to see which one has the better video capabilities. Now, generally speaking, I think both of these two cameras are really good in terms of video recording capabilities, but I would have to say that the 7D Mark II definitely has a little bit of an edge over the Sony a7 II, mostly because it does a little bit better job in downsampling some of the high detail images to the SD card. So as you can see from over here, definitely we see a little bit more artifacting and aliasing on the Sony compared to a generally sharper image on the 7D Mark II. But generally speaking, if you want to see a really sharp image, I can show you some of the footage that I shot with my hacked GH2 at over 100 megabits per second, and you can see that this is a really sharp image compared to those other two cameras. So in most cases, these cameras are not the sharpest cameras that you can get in terms of video capabilities, especially when you compare it to some of the stuff that Panasonic is doing, but generally very usable for pretty much most applications. And in terms of the low light performance, we kind of see the same results as we've seen in the stills capabilities, where the 7D is not as good as what the a7 II can deliver in terms of low light performance past about 3200 ISO. A little bit more noise certainly shown in that 7D image compared to that full frame sensor we have on the a7 II. But on that, guys, that's really it. I'd love to hear all your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, what you guys thought about the overall comparison between these two cameras. I'm a big fan of the 7D Mark II. I think it offers a lot of different options for a whole bunch of different shooters. It's mostly geared towards being a very rugged sports and action photography camera because of its 10 frames per second, very fast focusing system. But I like the fact how both of them have the hybrid AF system, so they're both great for photo and video autofocusing capabilities. Sure, I think the Canon lineup of lenses is a lot more mature and a lot more established, but Sony has a fairly growing library of lenses. So if you're into perhaps getting a new camera system or adopting a new camera, I do like some of the aspects of what the A7 II offers. But again, love to hear your thoughts about everything. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.